Listen. Okay, I'm ready. All right, this is Burn This Book, a banned books book club where we, Nicole and Eden, read a banned or challenged book twice a month and discuss its meaning, impact, and censorship to make it more accessible for all readers. Joining us today is Katie Workman, calling in from Virginia to talk about sex education. So, Katie, tell us about yourself and your connection to the subject and these books that we've been reading.
Sure. So I am a psychotherapist and a mother of 4. So I think those are my main connections to these books in particular. I am also a book lover in general. So I love especially children's books. So this is kind of right up my alley. As a psychotherapist, I have some special training in working with those who are in the community of problematic sexual behavior, sexual compulsivity, sexual addiction, goes by lots of different names. And I'm also primarily a trauma therapist. So we talk a lot about sexual assault and abuse in various forms with clients and how to heal from that. And when I'm working with couples, we often talk about sexual intimacy. So definitely a topic that I'm familiar with and really am interested in studying and talking about. And mainly I'm very interested in talking about it because when I see it come up later in life, issues between couples, the result of sexual trauma, the issues that come with sexual compulsivity, I feel really passionately about early intervention and trying to prevent some of those things from happening later, then we don't have so many really serious issues.
Yeah, that's heavy work. That's, I don't know. Yeah, that's a lot, especially with, that's a lot of heavy work.
Yeah. It's good to be on the healing side, right? I get to help fix the problem, which is encouraging. It makes it a little bit less heavy, for sure.
Yeah. And it's what an interesting perspective, too. Like you're seeing in some ways the consequences of not having the education in early years.
100%. Yep.
Yeah.
That was an interesting point that you brought up. It feels like a lot of the reason why people are banning these types of early sex education books from libraries and schools are because they don't want their children exposed to this information about their bodies. And I'm wondering what the risks are that they foresee. My take was I just think they feel awkward about it. They don't want to explain it to their kid. But the ramifications aren't if your kid learns this, they're going to be a pervert. It's if this kid doesn't learn this stuff, then they will run into issues when it comes to having healthy relationships.
Right. Yeah.
And can you speak to that a little bit more, Katie?
Yeah. Oftentimes when I'm helping parents become more comfortable talking to their kids about sex, which you guys both identified is really important. It's really, really laying the foundation for a future healthy relationship with their sexuality, which is important across all kinds of different levels. So when we are helping parents to get more comfortable talking about those things, I often start with what are your values around sex? And some people have thought that through. They've maybe learned it from a faith-based perspective. Maybe they've carried over what their parents taught them. Maybe they have put a lot of thought into it, but oftentimes it's not something that people have spent a whole lot of time thinking about, right? What are my sexual values? Where are my limits? What kind of things do I want to teach and hand over to my children? And when we're kind of figuring out where our sexual values are, we have to also question, what messaging did we receive? What messages were given to us by our parents? What messages were given to us by our communities, whether that be the public school system or, again, maybe a religious experience or the friends that you had growing up, or even your personal experience. If you were assaulted or you had some early exposure to pornography or whatever the case may be, those things are going to affect the way that you feel about sex and talk about sex. And let me back up and kind of say here that when we talk about sex as well, we're not just talking about intercourse. when we talk to kids about sex, we want to talk about sexual health as a whole, which means body positivity, hygiene, eating, menstruation, and puberty. We're talking about across the board a lot of different topics that all apply to having a healthy sense of sexuality.
Yeah.
And so I think, a lot of people feel really awkward about it because this awkwardness is kind of inherited, and they don't ever take the time to sort of sit in it and examine it and say, okay, what messages did I receive around this that I feel awkward about it? Truthfully, kids don't feel awkward about their bodies and sex. They don't come feeling awkward. They kind of pick up on those subtleties that we share with them because we're so awkward about it. So one of my favorite sayings is, we have to tolerate our own discomfort for their benefit. We have to kind of suck in that discomfort that we inherited in order to not pass it on, and try to speak about it with them as openly and as like casual as possible, so that we don't give that to them.
Yeah. I think an example of that is periods, just talking about periods. I feel like a lot of us millennials come from the background where our parents, they just didn't talk about menstrual cycles. Like there's a lot of, I don't even know if shame is the right word, but it's very private. You don't talk about your menstrual cycle. Men aren't supposed to know that you're on your period, kind of thing. And I grew up being like, oh, I need a tampon. Dad, can you go get me a tampon? But even then, it was still like, that was very unique. And I think about that a lot as a woman in my 30s now, of how bizarre that is, that was unique for even our generation in the 2000s to not even be open about period health.
I actually have a friend so I have two stories about periods. I have a friend who, she married someone who only grew up with brothers, and his mother never talked about her period. And he was traumatized when he married her and realized what a period was. What a time to figure out what a period is. Like, you just got married and you're like, what the heck is going on? Why are you bleeding everywhere? And then as just like a result of me just growing up with sisters, I learned that my mom gave us a little bit more leniency if she knew we were PMSing. So Mom, I know you listen to this. Anytime I talked back and she was like not having it, I was like, I'm on my period. And then she'll be like, oh, okay. And then she would back off.
Get out of PE or gym.
Yeah, exactly.
So when we think about children who are in this space of learning about their bodies are just bodies, living their lives, and they're going to elementary school, and some kids are starting to develop faster than other kids. And then people are starting to talk about stuff. I remember like third grade and second grade were like the times when I started hearing bizarre things about bodies and about sex and about stuff like that. What do we do at that point when you're also being cut off from that education from your parents, or your parents are also pulling you out of that education from schools? How do you encourage parents when they come to you and they're like, hey, I know I need to tell my kid this. I know I need to teach them about this.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you kind of had two questions in there.
I had a lot going on, and I'm sorry. You pick it.
That's okay. So you were talking about how do you help kids? How do you help parents who are wanting to talk to their kids about these things at the age they start hearing things at school?
Yeah.
Right. And then second too, like if schools aren't providing this education, if we were to remove these books and things, then how do you help kids that need to understand those things? Okay. So
Okay, Nicole, buckle down. I just have
no.
Kids, but I just want to know all this stuff.
I love it. I love that you want to know all this stuff. I feel very passionate about it. So I'm happy to keep talking as long as you'll let me. Okay, so question number one, how do I empower parents to talk to their children about these topics? I say start before they start hearing things in elementary school, right? You start as early as you possibly can. And even practicing when they're in the womb, right? Getting comfortable saying things out loud. So sometimes in workshops, I'll have parents talk to each other and say words that they're not comfortable saying, or those kind of words that you whispered growing up, or you had to spell it out instead of actually saying it out loud. Practice getting comfortable with those things. Make it as common to say the word penis as, as common as it is to say Cheerios or milk, right? So we want to practice getting really comfortable with these things. And when you've got a toddler in the bathtub who's just discovered a body part and you're like, what does this mean? Right? You've got this cute little perfect innocent 2-year-old and you're worried that they're going to become sexually deviant or something that they've discovered, right? That's the moment where you get to kind of set aside your fear and be really positive. Yeah, that's, that body part has this name, and we're going with the actual name, right? Not a nickname or anything. And isn't it great? These are the things that it can do. And isn't your body wonderful? Isn't that amazing? So that you are not giving them discomfort around their body and about certain parts. We don't want to. We know that when there is any sort of an unhealthy relationship to something, that thing becomes problematic. So if we take food, for example, if we become sort of nervous about eating, often this happens to teenage girls, other people for other reasons, then we sort of have an unhealthy relationship with food, and we can go over the top and indulge too much and not really know how to regulate that. We can underindulge and not eat enough. So the same thing, if we become uncomfortable and nervous and anxious about our own bodies, I can't look at that part, I can't wash it, I can't touch it, I can't say its name, then it becomes more likely that we will have a problematic and unhealthy relationship with our own bodies. We will overindulge, and you see that with sexual compulsivity, pornography, use, like a problematic use of masturbation. And then you also see it with sort of a sexual anorexia. You see people sort of turn off their sexuality and not know how to engage and not be able to have a meaningful sexual relationship with a partner in the future. So we want to, right from the very start, in those baby moments and diaper changing and bathtubs and when songs come on the radio about healthy relationships and about sexuality, we take every opportunity we can to just sort of can't see this, but I'm layering my hands, right? And these just little layers of foundation that you're building so that when somebody says a crazy sexual term at school in the 3rd grade or the 4th grade, your child feels comfortable telling you what they heard. And you feel comfortable explaining that to them because they have this whole foundation of talking to you about sexuality and bodies and etc. Right? Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense.
It does.
Especially as like kids, because we hear the stories of kids, and many of us have experienced things where we have been in situations where like we've been touched inappropriately, or we don't understand and we don't know how to talk to anyone about it. I think that you just explained that so well, that you've already opened that door of clear communication, and of good faith communication between the parent and the child, where the child's not going to feel like they have to be defensive when they come to talk to the parent about something odd that had happened or something odd they heard, because they've already had that line of communication open. I think that's so wise. That's so great.
It happens moment by moment too. You have to really be sort of always ready to capitalize on a learning experience. And it can backfire too, because now my oldest is 13 and my second oldest is 12. And they're like, Mom, not everything is a learning opportunity. It's kind of really be choosy about them now. But, back in the day, it looked like watching a Disney movie and saying, okay, does the relationship between this prince and this princess, does it seem healthy to you? Does it seem like, teaching them terms like limerence or infatuation versus love and true intimacy, right? So pointing those things out and having those kinds of discussions as they come up just kind of, and you don't have to do a whole on lecture or a whole on lesson, right? But opening that communication gives them, and also when we're talking to our kids about these things too, I'll always end on, do you have any questions? And they typically don't have any questions in that moment. But then I give them this ending phrase that's always, if any questions pop up later, you are always welcome to come to Dad and I at any time, and we can start talking about this again. And is it okay if I check in with you later to see if any questions have popped up? And all of these things kind of leave a conduit between the parent and the child that allows them to feel comfortable talking about these things with you.
I have one more question. Are you going to answer another question of mine that I forgot that I asked already?
Yeah. Yeah. We can take another question though. I'm writing them down.
Go ahead. You keep going.
I will say, if you're listening and you're thinking, well, I haven't done that. I didn't start in the bathtub. My child's 16 now, and did I ruin them? No, it's never too late to start talking about these things. They're probably going to react funny if you begin now, but that's okay. Again, if you
be a bit of a shock,
you're like, remember when we watched Frozen? Let's talk about that.
But if you kind of continue to tolerate that discomfort, and you keep at it, and kind of begin to open these kinds of conversations, it's not too late to shift the kind of relationship that you've been having. And you can even say, hey, I do this often when I am caught off guard by a question and maybe don't answer it the right way. I can go back and say, hey, remember a few weeks ago when we had that conversation and I answered you this way? I thought about it more, and I feel like this would be a better response. So you can do the same thing. Hey, remember when you were 12 and we talked about this? I've been thinking about it, and I have a different perspective now. Would you mind if I share that with you? It's okay to rewind and sort of re-teach something, or say you made a mistake, or that your thinking has evolved, and go back and open that conversation again.
I would actually argue that when I've heard my parents say that they changed their mind about something from years ago, or that something has evolved in their perspective, it is so trust building for me, because I feel like I have space to evolve as well and to revisit things with them. And it acts as a really good example of someone with a learning mindset.
I agree.
I have another question, and then Eden, you can ask all your questions. I've noticed that often the burden of having these conversations about bodies and sex and puberty and all of that often falls on one partner in a relationship. How do you encourage in your own partnership that it's a shared between both of you? Is there a tip you have for us, Katie?
Good question. So I think my thought is that if a particular parent, and you're right, it does typically fall toward one parent, and most typically the mother, right, in a heterosexual relationship. If one parent isn't invested in wanting to instill something different in their children that was instilled in them, or if this isn't a value in their value system that they want their child to grow up with, a sense of healthy sexuality, there's not a lot we can do to move someone from one stage of motivation to another. If they have an interest in it, or they're developing an interest in it because their partner has this value, right? If the mother or the father has this value and they want their partner to get on board with that, sitting down and having a conversation between the two of you about how you're going to approach this, getting really clear on what your values are. Is sex for marriage? Is sex for a dedicated partnership? Is sex for, whatever it may be? How do we feel about pornography? How do we feel about masturbation? How do we feel about safe sex? And how do we want to talk to our kids about STIs and abuse and all those different things? Get really clear on what your values are around that. Question, and I can even share with you guys, I have kind of a script that I'll share with parents sometimes to sort of start those conversations between them, and question, okay, what value system do we have right now? What value system do we want to get to? And where did those things come from? What experiences did we have that affect the way that we view these things? And again, practice words, getting really comfortable talking with one another about sex, which is not sort of your norm in a lot of coupleships, will help to get really clear on what you want to teach your children. Mm-hmm. And if the partner who's maybe not so apt to be having these discussions with the kids is on board, then you can sort of meet and talk about whether you're meeting the needs and the goals that you set for your family. Are you capitalizing on these conversations and these learning moments when they pop up and so forth? One book that I really love that I think I recommended to you guys is 30 Days of Sex Talks. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but for people who are listening, they're great. There's one for each age appropriate level, and they're just like 1 minute conversations. There's one page and it has a topic, and then there's like 3 questions on the page next to it. And we've done these with our kids, and it's helped the parent who really maybe doesn't have the perfect thing to say to guide their conversation. And they're little tiny conversations that build on one another. And that can be really helpful for a parent who doesn't have a script or doesn't feel very comfortable to engage. So we would kind of pull some of our kids in when they were at that age appropriate level where they start asking questions, or we wanted them to know these things, and pull them into our room after the other kids had gone to bed, or have this and they loved it because they, first of all, were kind of unaware that this should be an uncomfortable thing to talk about. Mm-hmm. Second, also that they got one-on-one time with mom and dad.
Yeah.
And we would take turns kind of talking about these things with them. Given that both my husband and I feel really strongly about these things and we are on the same page, most of the kids will still come to me. Yeah. They'll still come to me when they have a question about their body, or they, when they have a question about sex or whatever. And I think that's just because I'm the parent who spends more time with them. Right. And that's normal. There's always going to be one parent who's kind of spending more time with the children, and that's okay. They also feel comfortable coming to him too. So,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I actually have that book, The 30 Days of Sex Talks.
You do? Do you like it?
Yeah, I do. I was, as a person who does not have a script for how to talk about these things, I was like, I'm looking forward to implementing them.
Yeah. It's good too, because we often think of it as like the talk. Have you had the talk, the birds and bees talk? But it really shouldn't be one talk. It should be a million little 1 minute talks.
Such a paradigm shift.
This book helps you to have a million 1 minute talks and not just one. Okay, we did that. It's over and done with, and we're never going to talk about it again.
Oh, that's such a help. And a big paradigm shift. It really is, because it's all about the talk. Yeah. Eden, did you have any questions?
Oh, I'm like trying to stop myself from taking notes, because I'm like, oh wait, I could just listen back to this. But so I'm learning a lot. I'm curious about some statistics if you have them. So I feel like the fear of teaching, like what I see among parents is that if you teach sex, then it's going to encourage people or kids to have sex. Or if you give them contraception, it's going to encourage kids to have contraception. You know what I mean? If you give them contraception, you'll encourage them to have sex.
Right.
Does it actually increase the prevalence of sex in kids and all of that? And then I have a lot of personal questions for myself. I'm just like...
We can meet after it.
Yeah, we'll meet after. I'll pay what? Yeah.
Oh no.
I'll set up a time. Yeah.
Give me soundly. I'm happy to answer personal questions as well. Okay, so it's hard to measure statistics for teenagers on how often they are affected by these things, because it would be kind of unethical to ask teenagers, how often are you masturbating? How often are you looking at pornography? How often are you having sex, right? Mm-hmm. So there's not a lot of great statistics on those things. And that specifically, I'm not aware of. But I will say, some statistics I do know is that one in three little girls, will be molested or sexually abused in some way. And the target age for that is 4 years old. And we do know, research-wise, that children who are openly talked to about sex and have used correct body names for their private parts are children who are less likely to be abused. And the idea is that those who are looking for someone to abuse are looking for a child who is more quiet, who is not going to tell their parents, right? And so if your child is openly talking to you regularly about their body and consent and safe behavior with strangers and even with family members, they are going to be more likely to tell you if something happens. And a predator doesn't want that, right? And so talking about sex is really important when it comes to preventing really serious traumas, right? These things stay with you forever and they affect everything that you do. So I guess I would say I'm more concerned about what happens when you don't talk about sex than increasing sexual behavior if you do.
Mm-hmm.
Also, let's talk about age appropriateness for a minute. So, it's age appropriate for a 2-year-old to tell lies, right? We kind of see our cute little sweet babies start to say, I didn't eat that cookie, when they have cookie crumbs all over their face. And right. And that's normal. We kind of look at it and maybe it worries us a little bit. We think, is my child a liar? When is this going to end? But also it's kind of cute. And you know that, okay, all 2-year-olds kind of experiment with lying and they're trying new things. This is an age appropriate problem. It's a developmentally appropriate behavior. So for a preteen and a teenager, experimenting with sex, whether that be masturbation or talking with friends or whatever it might look like, their sexuality is emerging at that age. So that is a developmentally appropriate behavior. That doesn't mean, just like the lying, that you may not worry about it a little bit and make you worry if it's within normal bounds, right? That it's not becoming problematic, because there is a difference between problematic sexual behavior and healthy, normal, developmental sexual behavior. But I think we need to expect that around that age period that they're going to be curious, interested, and more awake and connected with their sexually. And sort of whatever presents itself at that time, whether it's a friend showing them pornography or having a relationship with a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever it is that pops up, they're going to be curious about and engaged in. What you want as a parent is for them to have that open communication with you. So it's not something they're sort of internalizing and information they're getting from their friends or a source that maybe isn't true and helpful, and that they can talk with you about it, and that you are sort of the person that is giving them the more healthy perspective.
Yeah.
Is that helpful?
That's really helpful.
Yeah.
A lot of our community, I mean, we live in America. It's a very religious country. We see that in politics. We see that in a lot of places. That's a big motivation for banning a lot of this type of material, even these classes at schools. How would you encourage a family who is religious, who does have more strict parameters about sexual activity for their children, and more strict expectations about that, to encourage these conversations about sex about home? Because there can be almost like cognitive dissonance, I think, for the kid. If they're like, I need to be talking about this. This is healthy for me to talk about with my family, but I'm also not allowed to do anything. It's also bad to talk about. Again, that's what I'm hearing at church, whatever church this is. Because we get that in
all faiths.
Very complicated, not to call out one, which I just clearly did. How would you create that balance or encourage that balance for these parents who are trying to sort out religious belief with also healthy sexuality? Because it feels, what is the word I'm looking for? It doesn't matter what word I'm looking for. You get what I'm asking.
I mean, it's difficult. It's complicated to figure out. If I'm a person of faith and I've gotten the idea that sexuality is tricky, messy, maybe even bad, and to sort of figure out how to mesh that with empowering my child with sexual knowledge.
Yeah.
Right. Where's the line? It is a complicated thing to do. There's some really interesting research on different religions. I think Judaism, Catholicism, Christianity, all these different religions are listed, and it talks about which ones are more likely to talk to their children about sex, which children have had teen pregnancies, STIs, that kind of thing. What's the result of those? And it's really interesting to see the variation across religions. It seems to be that all faiths struggle with it.
Yeah.
So you're right in saying this is a tricky question for people who are people of faith.
Yeah.
So my job is never to tell someone what their value system around sex should be. You should be teaching your kids this or that, right? Yeah. It's never my job to say what your value system should be around it, but it's my job to help you figure out what your value system is around it and teach that to your children. So that might look like when you're talking to your children, your number one goal is to de-shame and normalize whatever it is that they're doing, right? If they come to you and they have a question, they've heard a sexual term at school that kind of makes your stomach turn a little bit and whatever, you want to normalize. Oh, it makes sense that you're curious about that. Let me explain what that means.
Yeah.
The amount of detail you go into is dependent upon the age of the child, the readiness of the child, your personal family value, right? The second thing is to instill your value. So first, normalize and de-shame, which is always, if you're not sure how to do this, just your first phrase out of your mouth anytime your child tells you anything is, oh, that's really normal, or that makes sense, right? That you, and in that way, you're providing a platform for them to come back to you again in the future, and you're signaling that you're safe. And then second, after you've talked about whatever it is, maybe they come to you and say, I've been looking at pornography or at night on the iPad or whatever. That makes sense that you would look at those things. Those things are really enticing for us, right? And then second, in our family, we believe that pornography can be really damaging if we look at it for reason A, B, and C, if that's your family value, right?
Yeah.
So getting really clear on what your values are, whether they're in line with your faith practice or not.
Yeah.
And then instilling those, teaching those second. We definitely want to teach values, but we want to normalize and de-shame first, which unfortunately I think doesn't happen, right? It's first, this is our family value of, we don't do that. You need to stop doing that right now. And parents, it makes parents so anxious that then the child also becomes anxious around it. And what we get instead is the value installation first and followed by shame, right? It's shaming.
Yeah.
The irony of it is that you want them to stop, and creating an anxious relationship with that thing is actually going to do the exact opposite of what you're wanting. It's going to increase the behavior.
Yeah. And it'll decrease the chance of them coming to you again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing though is these parents need to do their homework. like figuring out what their value system is, takes time and work. Like you need to have like that couple I'm thinking about, Eden, the couple that you talked about earlier where he didn't know anything about periods until he got married. Mm-hmm. Like that couple has a lot of work to do to figure out their value system about bodies and things like that. But they do have to do their homework and have the good reasons. And when you said like, in our family, we believe this about pornography because of this, like you have to have your reasons too. And I think that's work. And when I think about these books, to bring it back to our podcast, the books that we've read just for this topic alone have been helpful for me. I wish I had these books as an adult. They're helpful. And like, I think that before we ban them, I think each parent should read them and figure out their own value system around it. What I'm also hearing is like such intentional parenting. And I also think it's really empowering because you're not saying, don't have a faith practice, don't do these things don't work together. These things can work together. We just have to adjust the script, and you have to understand and figure out how to communicate what page you're on as a family. You can still be empowered by knowledge. And I sometimes feel like we think it's too complicated, so we just say like we shouldn't even touch it. I just feel so empowered. I really do. Even as an auntie, like I feel really like I have a little bit more. I feel like I have more oomph. It's not my place, I don't think, to go off and like educate my nieces and nephews. But if they do have a question for me, I do feel like I know how to talk to their parents about it better. And I feel like I know how to do that initial response of, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes total sense that you feel that way right now.
Good.
Let me talk to your parents about what they feel with your family values. But like, yeah, that makes sense. Like that alone already makes me feel empowered instead of me just panicking and being like, I don't know what the rules are here.
Yeah. It's everybody's least favorite conversation, right? There's so many jokes about the birds and the bees and where do babies come from being the choking question, right? So it makes sense that you feel that way, Nicole.
Yeah.
That's normal.
Let me normalize that for you.
Yeah. If I ruin the kids, it's like, it's just not, I can't do that as the auntie. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Let me address really quickly too, because you just brought up something in there that reminded me that earlier when you were asking about is talking about protection and contraception going to encourage kids to, participate more in it. I think that the more open you are with your kids, and this is not saying a kid who's never been talked to about sex and then goes and reads a book in the library. That's not the kid I'm talking about. But the kid who you have had many open conversations with is actually going to feel less like they need to use sex in an experimental way because they already have a lot of knowledge and empowerment around it. So for instance, when my kids go to school and they are having, they have like one sex talk a year at school and it's age appropriate, right? We're talking about bodies in kindergarten. We're talking about consent. And then you get a little bit older and you're talking about puberty, and then it becomes consent and sex and safe sex and so forth. I've joked with my daughter before, what did you, because we have conversations about that afterwards, and what did you learn? And she's like, I could have taught the class, Mom. Like, which is funny, but also she feels, whether it's true or not, like she's got a pretty good handle on what terms are and these things. And so she feels less like she needs to go sneak into a book and read something quote unquote dirty, because she already knows a lot. It's not mystifying. It's not this mysterious thing, which makes her, I think, in a better position to make thoughtful and intentional decisions. It's not in the driver's seat. Her sexuality is not in the driver's seat. She's in the driver's seat. Her sexuality is a piece of her, an important piece of her, but it's the passenger.
Yeah. I really love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Another book I love that I think I sent you both as well is I think it's Periods and Vaginas, Vagina and Periods 101, which is fantastic. It has a page where you have like a mirror and it tells you to look at yourself, which at first might be uncomfortable for some. But when you stop and think about the knowledge that males have around their body parts because they're visible.
Yeah.
And the complete lack of knowledge that females have around their body parts because they're not visible. I'm shocked sometimes when I talk not just clients, but to friends and loved ones who didn't know things about their bodies just because there's no way to see it really if you're a woman. And body awareness, just knowing what parts you have and how they function feels like a baseline.
We, in one of the books, in It's Perfectly Normal, we talked about this in our last episode. There was a journalist who was like reporting on it because he was like, it's wild that all these people are banning it, la da da. And when he reported on it, he had actually read the book and he was like, actually, I do think it should be like, it is really inappropriate. And the part he cited as being inappropriate was the part when the woman is using a mirror to look at her anatomy. And I was like so taken aback that that's what he found offensive about the book. And it just spoke to the embedded misogyny about women's health and about all of that, because that's like 101. Like when you start your menstrual cycle, you got to figure out where things are going. Otherwise it's going to be a very painful next like 50 years of not knowing how to use a tampon. Like you need to know what's happening. Using the mirror is like just such like a baseline education piece for being a girl, and for that man to say like, oh, this should be banned because that was too graphic. That idea of this woman looking at herself using a mirror felt so like explicit and like too sexualized.
Think about the message that sends to girls that their bodies should be objectified. Their bodies don't belong to them and their bodies are explicit.
Yeah. Inherently. Just
Yeah.
And that I was like appalled that this was like a modern journalist who's like supposed to be anti-book banning, and that's what he found was so offensive. And I was like,
yeah.
Oh my gosh. But it just spoke to the fact, and the article was received well by people, and they're like, he brings up good points. And it was like, this is where we are in talking about bodies, especially women's bodies. And that's barely scratching the surface about marginalized communities who have bodies and different parts that are not part of the heteronormative expectations. So it was really disheartening for me. Yeah.
Well, even like I had my 6-week appointment postpartum a couple weeks ago. And I was like, I feel like I should buy a handheld mirror because I'm like looking down there and like things don't look the same. And she like looks for me and she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. She brings a mirror and I'm like, oh, I guess it looks normal. Like but for some reason, like, and it could have been that like I felt everything with this birth that I'm just like, oh, he wrecked me. Like that I'm just like, there's definitely something wrong down there. But like if I had a handheld mirror on hand, I could have figured that out myself and just been like, take a peek myself. It's like, okay, things look okay. I'm not totally wrecked.
You sent us a list of awesome books to use. I'll just read them off real quick. The book Who Has What, Where Willy Went, 30 Days of Sex Talks. And there's, as I saw, there were different versions of it for each different age group. C is for Consent, The Care and Keeping of You, parts 1 and 2. Guy Stuff, The Body Book for Boys. Vaginas and Periods 101, it's a pop-up book. What's in there? I Said No, ! A Body Belongs to Me. A Family is a Family is a Family, and more. I'm sure there's a ton more books, but we'll make a graphic and post that as well as like recommendations. But how do you feel that books can be used in giving these conversations to children and having these chats?
I love that you asked that. Again, I'm a book lover, so I might be a little bit biased. I just love the smell of them. I think books are the easiest way to open this conversation with kids. Again, if you are not someone who feels comfortable, but you want to teach these things, a book gives you the exact script to do it with. It gives you and your child quality time sitting together where you are not in an awkward position, eye to eye, face to face, but you're both focused on something else. And you're not the deliverer of the information. You're presenting the information, and you're both able to consume it and process it in a low risk way. Mm. And then you can have more personal conversations about it as you go or afterward that are more personally catered to whatever needs there are in your family, with the individuals in your family. So books are huge. There's visuals and all kinds of things that you couldn't provide without the book. And if you leave them in your bookshelf, tucked in there between Dragons Love Tacos and Dr. Seuss, right? Then you've already done half the work of normalizing it. Yeah. Reading about your body is just as normal and pleasant as reading The Cat in the Hat.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when they go and they bring their stack of books to you, it's just one of the books in there. And you're doing the work of making this not a taboo, anxiety-ridden topic for either of you when you read the books over and over again. Mm-hmm. Can we talk for a minute about books in the public school system really quickly?
Yes.
Because that's kind of a piece of this too, is what role should books play in sexual education? So I'll be honest, I liked parts of the 2 books that you discussed in your last podcast. I liked parts of them. Other parts weren't my favorite around my own personal family culture and value system.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with the books necessarily, but I would say parents who are being really intentional would read the book before they presented it to their child. They would say, okay, does the humor in this book match the humor in my family, right? Because some of those books had kind of a humorous nature that might really click with some kids and some families. It might be the perfect vehicle for teaching them about these things. The humor in my family is maybe a little bit different than the humor in that book. And that might feel abrasive or even maybe a little bit traumatic for kids in some families. And that's not to say that their family culture is wrong or prudish. It's just different, right?
Yeah.
And so you want to really think about your child and what their needs. And even from child to child, I might have a child who's more open about talking about these things and one that's I'm going to have to be a little bit more gentle with. So where is your child? What age are they? Is this book age appropriate?
Yeah.
Does it match personality wise with your child? Is it something that matches your family value system? Is it more educational, more entertainment? What is the intent of the book? And so I may or may not choose these books to include in my home library or in my educational process for my children. However, I'm a very intentional parent. This is something that I've taken very seriously.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that there are many parents out there who are not. We know that. We know that there are parents who are not intentionally involved in sexual education or in parenting at all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the question then becomes, what role does society play in filling in the gap between children who are being intentionally parented and children who are not? Mm-hmm. Because those are the children who are going to be more at risk for sexual assault, for STIs, for teen pregnancies, for all kinds of for addictions, for all kinds of different things. If they're not getting the education at home, what role then does public school play in filling in that gap? And so I think what you're hearing from these parents that are banning the books are parents who are, I don't want to say intentional. Some of them probably are intentional. Some of them are, they're just more aware about what they want their kids reading about sex and not. But then there are kids who do need these books, and their only access to them is going to be through the public school. Their parents are not taking them to the library. They don't have a library card. They don't have money or access to go to the bookstore. And so some of these children, their only source of education will be in books like this, and they will need to have those tough questions answered. So it's a little nuanced, these books in particular, because
Yeah.
do I want my children checking it out of the school library? These might not be my favorite books for my children.
I wonder if as we are getting a new generation of teachers and librarians, if we will be seeing these other books entering in. And I also think that these books are the ones that are being banned because these are the books that parents recognize. I don't know if they are searching out, because it takes a lot of work to ban a book. We know this. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of people to get on board with like, oh yeah, I've heard of that book. That's a bad book. And so I wonder if these books are being banned because people know them. Like as simple as that. And just because they have been around for like 20 plus years. But I do think that speaks to the point that they might be outdated. They might not be appropriate for families, and that there are books that are better. That just because this one sex ed book doesn't read well to you, doesn't feel good, doesn't mean that the whole genre should be shut out. And I would love to like encourage if we could do like a book drive where we just get all the sex ed books and deliver them to all the school libraries, the ones that therapists actually are recommending, so they're not relying on the more like on the laurels of these like 1970s British advertising executive who wrote, Where Did I Come From? Like he has no business giving the sex talk to all these children. But that was the business he was in at that point. But, so I think that's such an excellent point that there's better out there. Yeah.
We could be like Olivia Rodrigo, who's throwing out contraception at her concerts. And we just like frisbee all these little children's sex ed books.
Period 101 or the pop-up books.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I also love that point too. Katie, you're so good at talking about these issues in a way that is which makes sense why you're so good at your job. But it seems so obvious to me right now that if a kid is relying on this education in their public school library, like then the chances are really high that they probably aren't attending like an actual physical library outside of their school building. Chances are that they don't have access in other ways as well.
And we're doing a disservice to those kids who are really put in dangerous situations because they haven't been taught these things. It's similar to kids that aren't being fed breakfast at home, right? We step in as a public school system and say, okay, if these kids aren't eating at home, we will feed them at school. So schools, either appropriately or not appropriately, are often put in the position to fill in the gaps of what children are not getting at home. And I agree with the argument that our school's in the best position to be making these decisions for our children. No, probably not.
Right. Right.
But if the parent isn't doing that, then who does it? Who gives that child what they need to be successful in life? And there's just not really a good answer. It's very complicated and very nuanced. And there's not a great answer for it. But you see this clash in banned books. You see this clash between parents who are very involved in what their children are looking at, reading, information they're consuming, TV shows they're watching, versus parents who are not. But it's dangerous for children not to eat food. It's dangerous for children not to know about their bodies and about sex.
Yeah. Thank you for laying that out. Do you have other thoughts you'd like to share? The time is all yours because we've taken all of yours. So you get to dictate how long you want this to go, Katie.
No, I guess I just want to empower parents because regardless of what's happened to you in your past, regardless of what you've already done with your kids, you can I want you to feel empowered that you can instill a healthy sense of sexuality in your children, and you can shift the sexuality in your own life as well. If you just do the work of thinking it through, journaling about it, getting educated, and practice, it will get easier. It will get less uncomfortable. You'll get less nervous. And the gift that you are giving this future generation is the gift of a healthy relationship when they grow up with their sexual partner, a defense against sexual assault and sexual abuse.
Yeah.
You're giving them a leg up on problematic sexual behavior when it comes to excessive masturbation and pornography, which is kind of an epidemic at the moment. There are so many, because we often think about this like, oh, this is this teeny tiny part of our lives and it's in the bedroom. It's not. It feeds into everything we do. And so you're just really giving your child an incredible gift if you get intentional about this and open these conversations, and books are a great way to do that.
Yeah. You explained it really, I loved it. And I have homework to do of figuring out what my values are and writing that out, and like really doing my homework just as like a woman, a single woman, figure out what my values are and how I want that to look and feel like in my life when it comes to my own sexuality. So that's very helpful. I challenge all of our listeners to figure out what your values are around this so you can know how to talk about it. This has real world ramifications, which is amazing.
Well, I just know I'm going to buy all of those books that you recommended, because when you stated the statistic earlier about like 4 years old, or kids being 4 years old, that's when predators.
1 in 3 girls,
mm-hmm.
And the target, like the average age, is 4 years old.
Yeah, my daughter's turning 4 in September, so I'm just like, all right, let's crack down on this. Like, we're gonna crack down on it. Even just, I think it was earlier this week, or maybe even last week. A boy at her school pulled her pants open just to see, like, oh, are you wearing a diaper or underwear?
Probably totally innocent.
Yeah,
totally innocent.
Mm-hmm.
Also,
but yeah, all he wanted to know, what was that?
I'm all mad at him now, but go on.
Oh, I know. I'm like, who dare touches my child like that? But yeah, just like after the fact, like Greg was driving her home, so he had like a big talk with her in the car. And then when we got home, he told me about it, and we practiced like saying no. And like we even encouraged her to push harder, or like to shout louder and be like, no, like you can push, because he is touching. You did not give him consent to touch you in that way, or like to pull on your clothes. And so you should just push back and say no, and then you go to your teacher.
Yeah, I'm with you.
No, but it's true though. Yeah.
On that note, on that topic, we spend a lot of time teaching our kids about fire safety and bus safety, and we hold hands when we cross the street. And how often does a car come, but we still teach them to hold hands when we cross the street? And how often has your house burned down? Never, likely. Right? But we do these drills. We teach them what to do just in case.
Yeah.
And we should do the same thing with sexual abuse, because that is actually more likely than your house burning down.
Yeah.
And so it's really a great idea. I think that one of the books is I just say no, or just say no.
Mm-hmm.
Really good one. Really, really great one for opening these kinds of conversations. And so I'll often talk with my kids about, okay, here's a secret code word. If you're uncomfortable and you call me and say the secret code word, I will, come get you right away. Or let's say you don't have access to a phone. What do you do then? Right. And the book talks about locking yourself in the bathroom at someone's house so that they can't just pretend you're sick, and lock yourself in the bathroom and stay in there until mom comes and gets you. And I'll always ask, after I pick them up from a birthday party or a play date or something, how did it go? Was it fun? Were you comfortable there?
Mm.
Did anything happen that you were uncomfortable with?
Mm.
It's just the regular script after we pick up, right? Who did you interact with?
Yeah.
Are you interacting with big brothers, with dads, with moms? Were you comfortable? Yes. Right. And that helps safeguard those kinds of situations as well. And if I'm vocal about the fact that I do that, so we lived in Europe for a little while, and in Europe, all the kids go on like an extended overnight. They call it a residential trip. And I don't know, maybe it's trauma from my job, but I get nervous about sleepovers and things.
Yeah.
It's not something we normally do. And so I called the teacher and specifically talked to her about my concerns. And I went over with her what I went over with my son. Again, you're signaling to other adults that this is a child who knows their stuff and who has been talked to and drilled. And so both for the child's benefit and for the adults in your life that are around that child, they know that this child is aware and is on guard for those kinds of situations. And I love, Eden, that you told her to use her voice. I think that's something that women don't get encouraged enough to do, especially in those situations. So empowering her and saying, you can yell, you can shout, this is your body and you get to decide is so wonderful.
Yeah. She's a quiet person. Yeah. Unless she's silly, and then she'll be screaming and silly. But like when she's nervous or uncomfortable, like she clamps up. So that's something we're working on.
Yeah.
I have one more question. How do you know what is age appropriate to teach at each stage? So
that's
cut out my awkwardness, but yeah.
Yeah, no. That's a good question. I was actually working with not the school we're currently at, but the one before that. We've moved around a lot. And so we've been at a lot of different schools for a lot of different various sex ed programs. And so the last one I was kind of working with them to develop what they were doing. And they asked the same question. So what is considered age appropriate? And, if you're not an expert, not to say that I'm an expert, but if you're not an expert on these things, then it's hard to know, right? There are lots of different, you can Google and look. And even on the sex ed books that we're talking about, there'll be a suggested age range, right? That doesn't mean that your child falls within that age range. So you have to take that with a grain of salt and just understand that you are most likely the expert on your child and you know what they're prepared for. However, don't assume that because they're not talking to you about it or asking you questions that they're not there. It could just be a signal that they don't feel comfortable talking to you about it. So I've had friends who their kids are like 13 or 14 and they say things like, "Mo, my child's totally not thinking about sex. It's not even in their realm." And chances are they're just not talking to you about it. And so if they get to a certain age and they're still not talking to you about it, then you want to sort of introduce those conversations. Two kinds of conversations, parent-led and child-led. And when they're younger, a lot of the conversations are going to be child-led. They will let you know what they're ready to hear because they will ask questions, right? They'll ask, I've had 4 kids who have asked, where do babies come from at different ages and stages, according to what they've been exposed to and what their little minds are working on. And so if they're asking you a question, they're ready to hear that answer. Mm-hmm. You don't need to give them the whole, if they're 6 and they're asking about where babies come from, you don't need to give them the whole textbook explanation. You want to respond and just answer their question. And if they have more questions, then you know that they're ready to hear that next answer, right? So you kind of let them lead the conversation. But just to add to that, don't let them lead the conversation so much that you aren't introducing important things for the stages that they're in. But there are lots of different websites and things that talk about, okay, at 2 to 3, this is what they should be learning about. At 5 to 6, this is what they should be learning about. And those 30 Days of Sex Talk books those have age ranges as well. And so those are some really great resources too.
Like to have it child-led at this point, for me, at 3 years old, but also looking, like you said in the beginning, looking for those educational moments as well.
Yeah. I mean, when you're teaching, I would say parent-led with a 3-year-old would be, or even younger, when you're teaching them with their eyes, their nose, their belly button, what are all these things called? Don't disclude some of those body parts that you're not comfortable saying the name of, right? And so some of that will be parent-led, some of it will be child-led. At 3, you're going to talk a lot about body parts and cleanliness, like washing your hands and taking baths. the big thing is going to be consent. If uncle or grandparent wants to hug them and then you instill in them, that's your body. You get to decide. You get to decide when you want someone to touch your body and not. And even coming down to like maybe changing a diaper or helping wipe a potty training child and saying, even as the mom, hey, can I help you wipe? It's your body. You get to decide. Right. Or there have been times where we're at the doctor's office and you say, okay, the doctor's going to check your bum, but it's okay because mom's right here. And if you're uncomfortable, you can say so. Kind of instilling in them that their body is theirs and they get to decide, and explaining what kind of touching is appropriate and not appropriate.
Yeah, I found that like not over-explaining, just explaining things that are happening just is always a good route for a 3-year-old. Like she accompanied me on that 6-week postpartum checkup. And I told her beforehand, it's like, all right, the doctor's going to check, like I'm going to take my pants off and the doctor's going to check me. And that's okay because she needs to make sure that I am healing.
Love that.
And then the other day she went up to me and was like, Mom, why do you have milk breasts? Just like, good question. Just
Isn't it amazing that my body can make food for a baby? Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Right? You really want to like play up the body positivity, because the more positivity they have towards their body, the better we are with body image, eating disorders, being emotionally aware, all those things. If we like our body and we feel positive about it, it's just can only go good places.
Yeah.
It really does seep into every single part of our lives.
It does, yeah.
In this conversation. Katie, why is it taking us all so long as a society to sort this out? It's so
I don't know. I'm with you though. I've had to do the same work and come to the same.
Yeah. I don't know anyone that doesn't in this entire world, just because there's so many complexities, and it's always surprising which things are shameful in my family dynamic, which ones aren't when it comes to bodies, and it's unique to each. And I feel really empowered right now. I feel like I have tools. I feel like I have scripts. I feel like I have work to do. And I feel like I know what the work is, and that is like really, and I also feel like, I just feel like I'm going to be like the best auntie ever. If I can sort this out, and those body positivity messages for my nieces and nephews, I'm just very excited. I'm very excited about this episode. Katie, if you ever want to come back on, you are more than invited. I think this will be very valuable.
Burn This Book is produced by us, Nicola Corin and Eden Wen.
Music by myself, Nicole, and performed by my dad, Frank.